In 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland and set the stage for 6 years of total war throughout large parts of the world, kickstarting the Second World War. Germany went from a defeated nation in 1918 to the master of most of Europe in the 1940s, with a fascist dictator in power. But how did this happen? Who voted for the Nazis? In this video, I'm going to look at who voted the Nazis and Adolf Hitler into power in the fateful election of 1933, and build up a profile of what a Nazi voter looked like. Where did they come from? How old were they? Were they male or female? And how did they make their living? Were they all from a particular class, and did they all follow the same religion? Now, several things are striking when looking at a map of Nazi party votes from 1933. The North, for the most part, is more pro-Nazi than the South, with the notable exception of the Western Rhineland and some of the central southern regions. The northwestern areas in particular show very large support for the Nazi Party. Perhaps it's no coincidence that these very pro-Nazi areas belong to the old Prussian Empire, which under Bismarck united the other German states into the first unified German Reich after defeating both the French and the Austrians. Another striking thing about the distinction of Nazi voters is the distinction between rural and urban areas. Urban areas stick out like sore thumbs even when surrounded by pro-Nazi regions. Cities like Hamburg, Berlin, Potsdam, Düsseldorf, Cologne, Dresden and München all have far weaker support for the Nazis, even when they are surrounded by very pro-Nazi regions in the north, like in Berlin, Hamburg and Potsdam. This is perhaps very unsurprising because early Nazi propaganda was very much focused on urban voters, as can be seen in their election posters from the late 1920s. However, the Nazis found the most sympathy in the countryside, in small farming communities among the peasants and agrarian workers. Nazi support in large cities was a tenth below the popularity of other parties, and 50% of first-time voters in the half-decade from 1925 to 1930 lived in towns of under 5,000 inhabitants. City-dwelling industrial workers often preferred to vote for the Communists or the Social Democrats, and the cultural shift of the mid-1920s and the liberal ideas developed in urban centres such as Berlin, Bremen and Hamburg also made people less inclined to put a cross in Hitler's ballot box. A possible explanation for the North-South divide in terms of Nazi voters is the religious divide that had prevailed since the Reformation and later conflicts between Catholics in the South and Protestants in the North. In general, Catholics preferred to vote for their special interest parties rather than the more nationalistic parties like the DNVP and NSDAP. However, many of the Nazis' propaganda concerning the role of the traditional family and traditional family values rang true to many, so it was not a foregone conclusion that there was no support in Catholic areas. The Nazis had twice as much support in votes in majority Protestant areas due to the success of Zentrum and the regional BVP, or Bavarische Volkspartei, in the Catholic South. The widespread nature of Nazi support is much more evident when looking at the occupations of Nazi Party members. The working class, though making up the largest fraction of membership, was underrepresented in the larger German population, which was closer to being half of what's shown here. The Mittelstand, which is the German middle class, and other self-employed white-collar workers were notoriously anti-Weimar and distrusted the voting system, though they shared roughly equal representation in the Nazi Party and were overrepresented in comparison to their role in the larger German population. Nazi was initially a slang term and shortening for nationalist socialist, which attracted the working classes with both their socialist and nationalist promises. Small farmers and peasants had fared poorly under Weimar, which imported foreign grain and agitated agrarian communities, so many of these, usually traditionalist, Protestant and northern voters, chose to support the Nazis. The German middle classes found hope in Hitler's nationalist rhetoric, and may have hoped for a return to the authoritarianism in which they had prospered during the Second Reich under the Kaiser. Many young people were attracted to the Nazi Party as they made up large parts of the manual workforce. They might also have chosen for the Communists, but those who did not saw the Nazi Party as the alternative to them. The presence and discipline of the Sturmabteilung, or SA, also gave many youngsters hope, as well as fear if they were planning to vote for the Communists, so some of them might have been put up and might have voted for the Nazis instead. That Hitler's Germany would be resolute and a strong nation that would not suffer from the chaos and the coups that had marred the early days of Weimar. The Nazi Party also garnered support from the elderly. Veterans especially could relate to Hitler and the SA, who were initially made up of old soldiers and veterans and Freikorps members, but also non-military, retired elderly people who had not voted before saw the Nazis as upholders of traditional values. Although the cities began to see a large amount increase in the amount of women working in offices, publishers, and the government, in rural areas men remained by far the largest workforce, and so they were more likely to vote for the Nazi Party, at least in its early days. The SA also attracted men to join it and vote for the party. Women were, however, a force to be reckoned with within the party. They were less likely to vote for far-left parties like the KPD, as they made up almost none of the manual labour force that the communists pandered to, instead choosing to vote for religious parties depending on their beliefs. In 1932, 6.5 million women voted for the Nazi Party. In summary, the Protestant North was more likely to vote Nazi than the Catholic South and West. Rural workers were more likely to vote for them, in contrast to urban ones who often chose KPD or SPD. Though not specifically favoured by a specific group, the Nazis had much support from the working and middle classes. Nazi voters tended to either be young men or the elderly, bringing the average to a mean of 32 years of age. The amount and importance of women also changed over time, starting off fairly minimal until in 1932 female Nazi voters outnumbered their male counterparts. Given this information, a generic average Nazi voter from 1932 would be a rural, Protestant area in the north of the country, a working or middle-class man or woman around the age of 32. The Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party also had a very wide base of support throughout Germany's geographical, religious, occupational, gender and class divisions. The support of certain groups changed as time went on, some growing stronger and gaining support in areas and losing it in others. The Nazis' response to this was what made them a successful, electable party for millions of Germans in 1933, changing their tactics when their popularity fell within certain demographics of the populace. This wide base of support made the Nazi Party what Hitler called a Volkspartei, a people's party, and could be seen by the Führer and by many of its voters as a national party of and for Germany. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching. This has been my video about who voted for the Nazis and a little bit about why. Now I will link on the screen here some more videos about Weimar. I've made a playlist here if you have found this interesting, and in future I'll make some more videos about the Nazis and about this period in Weimar's history. So if you're interested, please check them out. If you enjoyed this, have a look at some of my other videos. I cover a lot of different topics and I try to upload once a week. So if you've got any questions or queries, just leave them in the description below and I'll be happy to get back to you and answer them there. Thanks very much for watching. This has been History with Hilbert, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.